This episode is brought to you courtesy of Colin True, host of the Rock Fight podcast and the Gear and Beer Show.
Welcome to Gear and Beer, the podcast for gearheads, beer buffs, and adventurers with discerning tastes, and the latest addition to the Rock Fight Podcast Network. I'm Colin True. I worked in the outdoor industry for over 20 years.
And I am Justin Hausman, senior editor at Adventure Journal, longtime professional gear reviewer, and certified Cicerone, which is also known as a beer expert.
Yeah, you were on break for a little while, buddy, and your intro didn't get any shorter. I'm not really happy about this. We need to go back to that.
I was trying to get it to be longer. I should have added something during the break. I'll work on that.
Well, today we are welcoming another podcaster. She is the host of the Outdoor Minimalist and Forever Chemicals podcasts, and she's here today to help guide all of us to gear that is PFAS free. Please welcome Meg Carney. Meg, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited.
How often do you get to be a guest on someone else's show?
I usually do a couple interviews throughout the year, like one a month, I would say.
Somebody was talking to me about this morning, and I'm like, yeah, I should do more of those because it's really nice to be on a podcast and not have to do really any of the prep work.
Yeah, it is super nice. I love it.
That's like me, Colin.
Yeah. All right, on today's episode, we will be leveraging the knowledge that Meg has gathered through all of her research and podcast production to address one of the biggest topics to hit the outdoor community in quite some time, PFAS, aka Forever Chemicals, that is in our outdoor stuff. While we know more about this topic than ever before, the fire hose of information on PFAS that consumers have to deal with can be overwhelming. So today we're sort of aiming to provide a new buyer's guide of sorts, the PFAS buyer's guide. But before we get to that, a couple of quick housekeeping items for our Gear and Beer listeners. Be sure to follow and rate the show wherever you're listening. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and that's your preferred podcast app, please leave us a written review. And if you take a screenshot of that review and send it to myrockfight@gmail.com, we'll send you a Gear and Beer and Rockfight sticker. And if you haven't had enough of our voices, please check out the OG Rock Fight podcast, the aptly named The Rock Fight, which goes up at least twice weekly. But let's get into it, though. So, all right, to get into the episode, we're going to start by cracking open a beer. Now, Meg is the guest on Gear and Beer. It was up to you to decide what pairing matters the most when you're having a conversation about avoiding toxic chemicals in our outdoor gear, as one often does. This is a very common thing that people do. So what beer did you choose, Meg?
I chose an Athletic Brewing Company beer. Not that because it has less PFAS, but because it's non-alcoholic.
Yeah, we have a debate, like, should it be organic? Like, what would be is there PFAS in the beer we're about to drink? I imagine there might be.
More than likely, yeah.
I mean, there's PFAS in everything, Colin.
Yeah, the problem with especially like the tin cans, not tin cans, but aluminum cans, is that they often have like some type of lining. And so like when it's being transported, then it will leach out the chemicals like BPA, any endocrine disruptor really. Yay.
Is this one of those things where you are now really burdened with this knowledge and it's like impossible to unsee all the things that you've learned?
Correct, yes. Yes, I see it everywhere all the time.
Well, let's lean into the PFAS revolution. Let's crack open these beers, guys. So, okay, so we have I have the Athletic, I have the Lemon Radler. And which one did you have, Meg?
The Upside Down Golden.
Oh,
that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, what are you drinking?
I couldn't find Athletic in my little town today. They were sold out, so I went with the Best Day Brewing, which is very good. Their Kolsch style. Did we do this one, Colin?
I don't think we did Best Day. We haven't done Best Day yet.
Are you sure?
We did Rationale and Athletic.
Best Day is great.
As the official Cicerone, which is a real thing, everybody. He's a beer expert and can prove it.
Well, we're not.
How do you feel about pairing the pairing of the non-alcoholic beers with this conversation?
Well, I'm a little bit worried that we're implying that beer or that alcohol is a toxic chemical.
No, Colin was just being nice because I don't drink alcohol.
Okay, all right.
It's a good pairing, though, don't you think, Justin?
Yeah, it's a good pairing.
All right. Everybody ready to crack them open?
I'm cracking it.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1.
I did it early, sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. A little variant. Cheers, everybody.
Hey, cheers. Huh?
Oh, you can taste the PFAS.
God, that's a good one.
I've never had the Radler from Athletic Brewing. I've never seen it before.
It's good.
It's really good. This is actually the last one of the ones that Justin and I got sent a couple of months ago. I've been sort of saving it. I don't know why, so I'm glad I did. It worked out perfectly.
Yeah,
those are good. This Best Day is fantastic. I forgot how good these are.
It was the Kolsch?
Yeah, it's really good.
Does it have the tea taste we've talked about?
Barely. Interesting. Wow. You know what? Almost not at all, but just right there at the very end. It's
Have you noticed that, Meg? There's a little bit of a tea flavor in a lot of non-alcoholic beers.
No, I don't think so. No.
Like almost like a black tea flavor. I love beer and I drink a decent amount of non-alcoholic beers for various reasons, but they tend to have a little like an astringency just by the nature of the way they remove alcohol when they make beer. But sometimes you can taste it, sometimes you can't. It kind of depends too on the other flavors that are going on with however the brew was made and what they put in it and stuff like that. But the Radler didn't really have much of it. I remember thinking.
No, it tastes like a lemonade. Honestly, it's really good. I really like this one. It's my favorite non-alcoholic beer I've ever had, probably.
Yeah, it's just like a slightly malty lemonade.
Yeah, pretty much.
Is nice. Yeah, this would be really good with lemon juice in it.
All right. Well, Meg, let's get started by painting a picture for you. All right, our beers are cracked. We're hanging out in one of our kitchens. We're planning an adventure. We made a list of the gear we're going to need on that adventure. And we're talking about PFAS, aka forever chemicals. And while there's been a lot of talk about the science and impact of PFAS, there hasn't been a lot of talk about what we can do about it. There may have been, but it still seems very much like a raw issue in our space. So, because while the facts matter here at Gear and Beer, we talk about outdoor stuff the same way you talk to your pals when you're out at the trailhead, you're at the put-in, or you're on the by the fire on the beach. And we don't talk about stack height, geometry, or width underfoot. Ever. We never talk about that stuff. Never once. Except every probably episode. But we talk about the experiences, our likes and our dislikes, and the everyday impact this stuff has on our lives. And that's kind of the approach we wanted to have to the PFAS conversation today and why we asked you to come on, because you've done so much work now in the space and covered it in a 10-part series specifically about PFAS. So we wanted to kind of drill into someone kind of listening to this and what can they take away to impact either the stuff they have or their future buying decisions. So, but just to kind of give it a start, could you just give us a broad overview of PFAS? Is our gear going to kill us? Like, what is going on with PFAS?
First, let me just define it, because I think sometimes people aren't as aware of it as you would think. But PFAS is PFAS, so it's an acronym for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, and that's a man-made chemical that was invented in like 1934. And forever chemicals is the more common term used for this class of chemicals. And when we're talking about PFAS, we're not just talking about one thing. It's like, depending on the expert, they'll say it's over 9,000, over 11,000, over 14,000 different chemicals that are PFAS. And they're called forever chemicals because they essentially last forever. So every PFAS that has ever been created still exists to this day, because we're still struggling to figure out how exactly, one, to remove them from our bodies and the environment, and also how to destroy them. And so I guess if we're talking about the uses in the outdoor industry specifically, the most common use that people would see would be in waterproof textiles. So clothing, tents, backpacks, and the like. There's a lot of textiles that are used in the outdoor industry, and a lot of them, for performance reasons, are having a waterproof coating, or they have some sort of membrane or lining that enhance that performance, not only for waterproofing, but stain resistance, oleophobicity, so like oil resistance, and actually breathability. So PFAS can do a lot of different things, which is why it is so widely used, not only in the outdoor industry, but in other consumer goods and in other types of manufacturing, is because the application is so broad. And chemical companies like to make money. It's also used in, I'm trying to think of some of the other product sets that would be used in the outdoor industry. One popular one that I think is kind of, they're moving away from, is ski wax. So if you look at a place like Park City that has a lot of ski resorts, kind of in an isolated area, if during the ski season you go out and test the snow, you'll find PFAS. And Park City's water system has now been polluted because of ski wax and PFAS in ski wax.
Like, when did we realize it's a problem, I guess is my first question. So the 1930s, I mean, obviously the first applications, I think mostly was in like cookware and Teflon and things like that, right? Is anybody, you saw it mostly in consumer goods? Is that accurate or no?
That's almost accurate. That's what most people would assume. But actually the first application was in World War II, and in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, they used it in holding the uranium in the atomic bomb. And so that was the first.
Yeah.
I love how that ends up being like involved in like the little microfilm things, like on like a toothpick or whatever, It's just
amazing.
like,
Yeah, and that's why the first episode of the Forever Chemicals podcast is called From Atomic Bombs to Teflon Pans, because that's kind of like the progression that it made. Because after the war was over, DuPont, now Chemours, who essentially invented this chemical class, decided, oh, this is really valuable and this can do a lot of things, so we should make more money off of it. And so they figured out how to enter it into the consumer market. And so like in the 40s, 50s, that's when you started to see it in Teflon pans, and it was really kind of pandering to that trad wife era.
Right.
Because they're like,
was that a thing? Now, surely they wouldn't have been called that back then.
No.
I love the idea of like the trad wife though, in her like actual like historical proper element. Like you wouldn't even really call it a trad. It was just wife. Just wife, maybe. Yeah. This is very. I've never thought about this before.
It's a wife who doesn't do sport climbing. They use traditional placement fingers.
Yeah.
Stuff like
That's
that.
what I'm talking about.
Climbing.
Yeah, of course.
Clean climbing.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah. So Teflon was like advertised pretty broadly as like, oh, this is a clean way to wash your dishes, and it'll make cooking easier. Cleanup is a breeze. That's definitely
And it did,
like,
I would
a
imagine,
slogan.
right? I mean,
Oh, sure. God, man.
right.
Eggs just fly right off that stuff.
Yeah.
So when did they kind of discover that, oh, there might be something here? And I'm sure it's much earlier than anyone wants to admit.
So I would say that DuPont and then 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, the other chemical company like associated with PFAS most commonly, they knew dating back to like the 1950s. So they conduct in-house studies on PFAS and like their other chemicals just to see like, oh, is this dangerous? And essentially, yes, they concluded it was dangerous. They did some really unethical studies on their workers, and I'm not sure their workers even knew that it was happening. Like one study, I'll have to find all of these resources and I'll send them to you, Colin, but one study that DuPont did is they like laced cigarettes that they gave to the workers with PFAS to see what would happen, and it gave all those workers cancer. So that was one of the earliest ones, and they didn't really publish any of this. They kind of kept it under wraps. They shared it between chemical companies pretty openly, but it wasn't moved into the public sphere or even like broadly scientists outside of the chemical industry until 1999, I would say. So there's about 40, 50 years that they were using these chemicals unregulated, because in the United States, at least, the EPA, we kind of have like this thing where we're like, well, we're not going to regulate it until we know it's dangerous. And so if they hid the dangers of these chemicals, they wouldn't have to be regulated. So that was kind of their motivation. But the big story of when it came to everyone's knowledge was with lawyer Robert Bilott and then a farmer, William Tennant, or Wilbur Tennant. Mr. Tennant. I'll just call him Mr. Tennant.
Wilbur sounds better.
Okay, I can't
Sounds
remember
like
his first
farmer.
name.
Yeah.
Sounds
Totally.
farmer.
The farmer Tennant. And this was in Parkersburg, West Virginia. And essentially this farmer was noticing not only was he getting sick, his family was getting sick, and he was losing a lot of cattle, and they were starting to have all these weird behaviors that were atypical. A lot of wildlife was dying. There was this weird foam appearing in his streams that the cattle were drinking from. And he realized that it's because the stream was running down from a chemical dumping plant or chemical dumping ground from the DuPont Teflon plant. And so Robert Bilott, he is from West Virginia, but is a practicing lawyer in Cincinnati, I believe. And Mr. Tennant knew his grandma and was like, oh, isn't your grandson an environmental lawyer? And so he went all the way to Cincinnati and was like, hey, can you help me with this problem? Showed him all the video and footage and documentation that he saved. And then 20 years later, the lawsuit was finished, and they were able to get a claim for Mr. Tennant. And then they opened a new lawsuit to test all of the residents in Parkersburg, West Virginia, to prove, yes, PFAS is an endocrine disruptor, can cause cancers and a variety of other health problems. And that's probably still the biggest like epidemiological study that they've done on PFAS to date. It was really significant. And if you want to learn more about it, you can watch the film Dark Waters on Netflix.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's like a dramatization of that initial 20-year lawsuit.
There's a fantastic article in the New Yorker from May of this year called "How 3M Discovered Then Concealed the Dangers of Forever Chemicals" that touches on a lot of, obviously, I'm sure Megan, you know this article, but that freaked me out reading it. Just how one of the things that's really interesting about the article is how it almost, it was just surprising how quickly it moved. You know, it was like, oh, some of the factory workers have it. Oh, wait, everybody in this town has it. Oh, like everybody who's like within 200 miles of this plant have it. Oh, it turns out people that are thousands of miles away also have it in their system. And this has been in the system, everybody's system for decades. And you know, nothing we can do about it now. But it's a shocking article, but it lays everything out really nicely.
So, Meg, as you look at this, and thank you for a great recap of the kind of where we are today. What do you feel like a consumer needs to know as we kind of enter it? Because it does feel like Justin and I talked about this a few months ago on the Rock Fight over on the other podcast. Because it was like, what are we going to do? I mean, you know, I'm 48 years old, and I feel like I'm probably half PFAS at this point, given the era in which I grew up in. They're like, what? Okay, well, what do you do at this point?
There's a lot of things that you could do. And I think that kind of like with other big scale issues that can cause a lot of anxiety, the easiest or the best thing to do is actually just talk about it. Like make it a normal part of your conversation with your friends, with your family, so people are more aware of the issues. And with PFAS, it can be really scary. And I mean, we should be taking media with a grain of salt and not necessarily buying into all fear-mongering, but with PFAS, it's not necessarily always fear-mongering because it is a global contamination issue. So even if it did start in Tennessee or West Virginia, it's now everywhere on the planet, and it's not necessarily something that we can avoid. And so I think finding ways to minimize our exposure to the best of our ability and not becoming so anxious that we like refuse to do things that we typically would have done before, like having a beer with some of your friends. Like, don't let that scare you away from some of the things that you really love and enjoy just because there are maybe some PFAS or microplastics in those products. And with PFAS specifically, I think it's important to recognize that they're bioaccumulative. So essentially what that means is if you're drinking just a tiny amount or exposed to it in the air or on your skin, that your body will, yes, more than likely absorb it, but that small amount is not what's going to harm you. You need to be exposed to really high levels of it over a period of time. And so that accumulation is then what is causing a lot of these health issues, which is why people who were drinking it from the time, like their mom was drinking it when they were in the womb, and then they continue to drink the water that has PFAS and these other chemicals. That's why when they turn like 17, 18, 19, they're getting brain cancers and dying. And so like you and I, maybe who didn't grow up in a hot spot for PFAS, would maybe be less likely to develop one of these disorders. But because we're exposed to so many endocrine disorders, these disruptors these days, it's kind of hard to avoid.
I grew up near 3 Mile Island, like literally, so I'm already screwed for a whole bunch of reasons. It's okay, you know.
Well, shit, okay. Sorry about that.
Is that why you glow when it gets dark?
That's why. That is the reason.
Fantastic.
God, how great would that be?
Well, we haven't really talked that much about the sort of you know, like what's going on with it in the outdoor space.
Yeah, I was going to pivot into that. Is there anything else before, Dave? Do you feel like we missed anything on the sort of? I think we have plenty of backstory here.
But maybe as we move into what makes it right, you know, or the outdoor piece of it, can you expand a little bit on? I don't even know how to get into the chemistry so much, but what makes PFAS so make it work for the types of products we use in the outdoor? And if you stick to the membranes and waterproof, that's good. For sure, that's kind of the biggie, because I also think you get into the DWRs. But what about its chemistry makes it ideal for the types of applications we use it for?
Okay, so PFAS is a fluorine and carbon bond, and like I said, there's a lot of different types of PFAS. So you can have longer chain or shorter chain. The initial uses of it in the outdoor industry and for textiles were a C8 chemistry. So that means that there are 8 little attachments to the tail of the PFAS. And what makes it so effective is that the bond itself is the strongest known in organic chemistry. So like some interviews that I conducted with scientists, they were saying like it takes the energy of lightning to break these chemicals. You can't incinerate it easily. You can't like just filter it out and throw it away. There's no real way to destroy these chemistries. And so when you attach them to something like a membrane, then they should theoretically stay there forever because the bond is so strong. And that makes them really effective in their performance because they're not likely to like be eliminated or broken.
Do you know how they're actually applied? like if you're making, if have you seen this? Like if you're making a jacket, is it like put into some sort? Is it suspended in a liquid and like sprayed on the material? Do you have any idea?
There's a lot of different ways to apply it from my understanding. Like, yeah, you can do it in a coating sort of spray or solution. A lot of times it's applied in the dyeing process. So it like will adhere to the fibers within the clothing a lot more strongly, but in the membrane, so like if you look at a Gore-Tex membrane before they changed to the EPA liner in most of their products, they kind of like press it and it is like this like flat, it's like a solid. And so they like take a bunch of PFAS that are combined and then they stretch it and flatten it, and then they're able to then adhere it to like the inside of say like a rain jacket or something.
So in terms of the day-to-day use of this stuff, though, I mean, the thing is, like, it doesn't diminish anything of what you described in terms of, like, what the actual chemical is or what it does. But it is relatively inert in terms of, like, how it engages. Once it's in that fabric form, once it's either sandwiched between something. So if you have an older jacket, anybody who's listening to this that is probably riddled with PFAS at some point, it is not like it is constantly leaching into your body, though. It is not quite the same as, to your point, being exposed to those contaminated waterways and things like that, like as we discover these problems.
Yeah, I would say, like, looking at the research that's come out so far, that it's not as dangerous as consuming it. Like, the number one way to, like, accumulate PFAS is probably in drinking water or even in, like, dust, so, like, airborne sort of things. But since 2015, there's been several studies that have come out that have shown that dermal exposure is possible, but it's more common with things like sunscreens or cosmetics, like something we're rubbing into our skin, like, or things that are directly against our skin, like underwear or a sports bra, exercise pants, like a Lululemon pant, that sort of thing, that you're more than likely sweating in it, and so you're more easily absorbing any chemicals leaching out. But yeah, something like an old Gore-Tex jacket, Gore-Tex advertised that this is not a dangerous polymer. It's a polymer of low concern. Put that in quotation marks, because there's no polymers of low concern. And they essentially said that because it is a solid and it's not sprayed on, and so they're like, well, it can't escape. And I can't say whether or not definitively that has been disproven, but there are plenty of research studies that have been published since those claims have come out to say that, yes, you can absorb it in your skins, but I have old PFAS-riddled clothing and jackets. I still keep them, and I don't wear any, like, synthetic underwear or like running shorts or like pants, because that is where I am concerned about clothing and textiles being absorbed. But as far as like a rain jacket, most of the time that's not directly against my skin, and so I will wear my old rain jacket and I'm not overly concerned. Like, yeah, the possibility is there, but I don't think it's like necessarily a reason to panic. But everyone can kind of make that decision based on their comfortability or comfortable level.
Well, that's kind of why we wanted to have this conversation, right? Because there becomes, as you learn about things, and there's the reality of the world and the reality of of these products and what you have to deal with. At the same time, like, there's a lot of information to consume, especially if you're a concerned outdoor consumer, right? So you have, okay, now on one hand, I'm being told, keep your gear as long as possible because there's no way to circulate, to put it back and to recycle it into something else. But then on the other hand, well, hey, and by the way, that old thing that you're holding on to as long as possible, good job. But now it's riddled with this chemical that's terrible. And it's just sort of like, how do you decide kind of what to do with what you have, right? And it's just sort of, I think that's kind of some of the fears, not to say that, we want to ally them, but it also doesn't mean that you need to go out and throw something away and buy something new either.
Yeah, and with PFAS, I think what a lot of outdoor brands right now are leaning into is the fact that the California AB 1817, which is a new law that will go into effect in 2025, they are kind of leaning into marketing that is saying, oh, you need a new jacket that doesn't have PFAS, when in reality, like, their old jackets will likely work just fine. If they use a DWR, it probably has come off in the last few years anyway, and you need to reapply some sort of waterproofing. So then you can use a PFAS-free solution like Nikwax and move on from there and still use your old jackets and have it be just as effective.
Do we know how this will be implemented, or how this will be tested for, right? Like, are they, we talked about this on the show before, Colin, and I think I feel like I've asked people in the materials world this before too, and no one seems to have a good answer. I mean, how are we gonna, okay, so no PFAS in jackets. Okay, who's checking and how?
I guess third-party testing would be the only answer I have, but it really depends on the tests and where it's coming from. And I think a lot of the rules right now are a little ambiguous. They'll be like intentionally added PFAS because it is really hard to avoid PFAS in the manufacturing process. So
Right.
it trickles down. Like we need the
Yeah,
suppliers to stop using PFAS in the facilities, and we need the chemical companies to stop selling PFAS, and we need the brands to agree that they are going to partner with suppliers and manufacturers that don't use PFAS in the dyeing process or as a way to make the gears on their mechanisms work better. It needs to be eliminated from the entire
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
supply chain in order for it to be effective and test zero for. And I think there's no real good answer to that question. And realistically, a lot of brands are going to continue to use PFAS. Even though Gore released the EPE liner in 2022, they still use PFAS in some of their liners and all of their other product sets for the medical industry and beyond.
So let's talk about what's happening in the marketplace now, to your point. Who are the brands that you think deserve credit for kind of doing it right? I mean, obviously you can define that however you like, but I mean, there was a time when all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but when people kind of realized this was an issue, and it was probably longer ago that people realized, and there's a handful of folks who were immediately started to address it. There's others who promised to address it and took a lot longer. There's some who still are probably working on that. They're rushing to catch up now that California has said, no, you can't do that anymore. So who do you like to give credit to? Who do you look at as sort of this is someone we should give some credit?
There are two specific brands. They're both in the European Union, and I always give them credit. You're wearing one of their hats. Fjallraven is one of them. They started phasing out PFAS, which were at the time called PFCs, in 2009. That was a long time ago. They started working on it. It was a known problem in 2008. Greenpeace put out a huge call to the outdoor industry to say, hey, PFCs or PFAS, these are really bad, and you guys use them a lot. Maybe you should try to develop new chemistries. And so Fjallraven and then also Houdini Sportswear, which is also a European brand, they both listened to that Greenpeace call back in 2008, and they started to develop new chemistries. And then in, I don't know, I want to say 2012 or 2018, somewhere in that time range, the NRDC made another call to the outdoor industry, calling out brands like Patagonia, saying, you guys are still using these chemistries and you need to stop because it's causing a lot of issues. And if a lot of these bigger brands can then kind of join in this push, which they named a lot of European brands that were already moving in this direction, then we can make a lot of changes in the textile industry, which will be really positive. And so I would say, and I've caught a lot of heat for this already and kind of been blacklisted in some arenas, because I said brands like Patagonia and REI are way behind, and they drug their feet pretty exponentially on this issue of chemical.
They're not alone.
No.
Let's just be clear. It's not just those two brands.
Yeah.
It's like I'm not gonna, we could say that it's pretty. The two you mentioned are really the only two who probably really were ahead of it.
People want to say that, but I disagree, because at the end of the day,
No, meaning Fjallraven and Houdini were the only two that were ahead of it.
Keen's been PFAS free since 2012.
Yeah, so
maybe not 2012, for a long time.
Keen was the one in the United States that I was going to mention, because they also started listening to scientists. So I think Arlene Bloom was one of the scientists that approached Keen to say, this is dangerous. Can you work on this new chemistry? And they did listen to the scientists. So a lot of the brands that were ahead oftentimes were approached by scientists specifically. There wasn't necessarily a legislation pushing them forward. They just took the responsibility onto themselves because they're claiming to be environmental stewards. And so if they're claiming these things and they want to align with their ethos and the planetary boundaries and all these things, then yes, they should be listening to what the science tells them.
Yeah, this is where, and I've talked about this over on the Rock Fight podcast a bunch. I think, Justin, you and I have as well. This is where regulation has to come into play, because these are for-profit enterprises, and at the end of the day, that's what they're going to do first and foremost is make money, and that's honestly what they're responsible to do. Now, I think the outdoor industry should lead in this stuff and they should be proactive in this stuff because like we all like to market it around like we go out and it's our playground and all those things and you want to take advantage of all that, but you don't want to necessarily always do the right thing. But this just says to me, like, look what's happening now. Some laws were passed and now everyone's like, oh shit, we gotta do something about it. And that's how it needs to work, frankly. Like you can't rely on the consumer to push for the change and you can't rely on the brands to make the right decisions. You got to kind of set the rules for how it should go. And that's kind of what still needs to happen in a lot of these cases, I feel like.
Yeah, and one thing that I do want to say is that when it comes to the manufacturing of these outdoor apparel or like products, is that sometimes they are making decisions in-house regarding like the liner or the solution they're putting on the outside, but other times they have a supplier like Gore. And unless Gore decides to make the change, then they're going to continue to use Gore until they phase it out. And so like I can't put all the heat on the actual clothing companies, even though they could be the ones like pushing Gore to be like, you need to change this or we're not going to buy from you. Like that would have moved the needle really fast if Gore lost all these huge customers. And Gore hates me, so I don't care if I'm saying this. So
well, it goes both ways. I mean, producer Dave and I were at Polar Tech for a long time, and like we had solutions. I can tell you right now, we had solutions, and they tried to hide behind like, well, you know, it doesn't. Our consumer really demands a certain level of performance, and it's like, nah, you just don't want to do this. You want to stick with what you got.
I was going to say there's been PFAS-free alternatives from a membrane as well as DWR for a long time.
Yeah, they're all culpable.
It's, you know, like you said, like, you know, they hide behind this need for an extreme use case, you know, and actually if you do block out what is the, you know, the waterproof measure in terms of, you know, keeping water out, water resistant versus waterproof, it's literally like you have to stand under a waterfall for 2 hours to get the kind of saturation that, you know, to make it water. Right. It's just not realistic to think that we couldn't have been making a move sooner to move that from the supply chain. But I would say PFAS wasn't the issue. It was maybe more of, let's call it monopolistic market power is what kept this. Okay. So it's not just the PFAS itself, but it was the, you know, when you have one player that can literally keep out any form of competition in that space, that's why we are where we are. So it's almost irrespective of the chemical.
All right, everyone, before we keep going, I need to tell you about our amazing teammates at Darby Communications. If you run an outdoor, an endurance, or an active lifestyle brand, there is no better PR or digital marketing belay partner or drinking buddy than Darby. They can help your business reach new heights, and they might just keep you from falling on your ass. I mean, since we started working with Darby, more and more people have been reaching out to us here at the Rock Fight because of that messaging. Look, guys, if they can help us, they can help anybody. Hit them up at darbycommunications.com. Do it today. So I guess the last thing, from my perspective is, how do you feel about, what should people do with the products they have with PFAS? We kind of addressed it, but like, is it it's don't worry about it? Or is it like, well, you know, maybe there's some things you should look at replacing?
I think the things that people should consider replacing are the things that provide the highest exposure. So like first and foremost, look at your water supply. Back in like February of 2024, the EPA released their survey of public water systems, and 60% of the U.S. water supply had PFAS above the proposed limit. And so get a water filter that can remove PFAS, which is an NRS 53 or 58. So you can look that up on their website. And beyond that, if we're looking at outdoor gear specifically, don't throw out your old tent or your old Gore-Tex jacket, because once it enters a landfill, it's going to enter the leachate in that landfill, enter the groundwater, and then eventually make its way back to us. And so if you can, then continue to use it.
Burn it. Just
set
burn
it on fire.
Yeah. Light that puppy up.
With lightning.
Meg's giving us you guys,
if you
let's not tell people to do
don't
that.
Burn it. Well, first of all, because it's not going to reach temperatures high enough to destroy the PFAS, but it will release a lot of
We'll see about that.
Good luck. If you discover that, then you need to let everyone know because they've been trying to do this for a long time.
But so what's left behind? The PFAS will still be left behind?
You haven't seen a NorCal bonfire, have you? All right,
Yeah.
so I'm just going to say.
You mean just living in NorCal?
That's right.
Yeah, right.
You know.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, so don't burn your clothing, please. The next thing that I think people should consider replacing is actually their underwear. And so if you wear synthetic underwear of any kind, that's a very delicate area on our body. We absorb a lot through that area when we're hiking or biking or just at the gym. We're sweating a lot in those areas. For women, also your breasts, like you sweat a lot in that arena. So get a bra that doesn't have PFAS because there are ties to a lot of different types of cancers and like it's directly on an area of your body that is sweating. And then the next thing, of course, for women is to try and find reusable menstrual products because, I mean, other than PFAS, like all of the new research that has come out with Tampax and stuff having lead and arsenic, like that's not something you want to be putting in your body. Like a disposable product entering that area of your body is never really a good thing. So
and there's PFAS in those products as well?
Mm-hmm. In most of them.
So it's like the Mount Rushmore of terrible things. You got lead, arsenic, PFAS. Like what's the fourth thing? There's got to be a
There's
fourth
probably
thing,
more. I don't remember everything that's said in that study, but like a lot of those products contain PFAS. But then if we're looking at other outdoor gear, like I said, the rain jackets, you can probably hold on to those. I shy away from a lot of synthetic clothing just because of the person that I am. And like, yeah, you can continue to wear that apparel if you feel comfortable. Like I said, throwing it away is not going to be effective if you're looking at the grand scheme of the world and the impact. But maybe you could repurpose some things. If you have, I don't know, like a tent, you could make a new tent floor or some tote bags or there's a lot of options.
Find other ways,
yeah,
right?
Than just throwing it in the trash. And like, use Nick Wax if you want to reapply a waterproof solution.
Never been PFAS in Nick Wax.
Since like 1945, they've never used PFAS.
That's cool.
So that's a great brand to trust and they're entering like more industrial manufacturing, which I think is really great to provide like a solution for brands in that area. But now, I mean, there's a lot of other things that you could do. The number one thing that I would say is be mindful of greenwashing, which is true for anything. So if you're buying something that says it's stain-proof, it's water-resistant, that should be a red flag. And you should look exactly what is making that waterproof or stain-resistant or even static-resistant. That can be a PFAS applied. And if the manufacturer does not state that it is PFOA and PFOS free, those are two most common types of PFAS, and they just say, like, it's waterproof and they don't tell you the solution, then don't buy it because they're probably lying to you.
Waxed canvas is safe, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, probably. I mean, waxes can contain PFAS, I'm sure. But
you can set that on fire, is what Greg is saying. We can burn
actually,
that
I never thought
all
about
day
that.
long. Yeah.
Paraffin might be entirely PFAS. I don't even know.
That's a good point.
No, like the old school waxes, like they used to put on Filson, which maybe they still use in Filson. I don't really know. Like those didn't used to contain PFAS. And so like some brands might be going back to some sort of wax treatment, but because of the trend of ultralight, I don't think it will be very popular. Some people might be using it, but something like...
Well, Colin and I are working on reversing that trend. At least I am.
Yeah.
I'm not
ultralight,
ultralight, so I don't really prescribe to that.
Bring all the heavy. I got a cast iron pan backpacking.
Speaking of cast iron pans, Colin.
Oh no! Don't take my cast iron pan away from me.
That is the best pan to be using that doesn't have PFAS.
Oh God! I thought you were gonna go the other way. I was so worried. I love my cast iron pan.
Yeah. So like Teflon is the original PFAS, or one of the original PFASs. So if you use a non-stick pan, then I would replace that as well because the heat from that can enter your food. And so I use just cast iron or stainless steel in my home, and that's generally a safer option.
How's everybody's beer? You guys enjoying your near beer? Everybody good?
Mine's gone.
Oh, man, I still got about a third left here.
I talked too much, so I didn't really drink it.
That just makes you a good guest. All right, well, we can wrap it up there. If you want to check out Meg's work, I put links in the show notes. as I'm trying to swallow my beer. So both the Outdoor Minimalist and Forever Chemicals. Meg, anything you want to tease about what's coming down the pike in your world? Anything new and exciting?
Well, with the success of the Forever Chemicals podcast, which we were the #1 chemistry podcast and the top 20 science podcast for several weeks, so we are looking for funding for a season 2, where we're going to focus on Forever Chemicals in consumer goods like cosmetics, lotions, sunscreens, and all that jazz. So you can look forward to that hopefully in the next year.
Should they go to Outdoor Minimalist website? Where should they go if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, theoutdoorminimalist.com contains both.
Well, Gear and Beer is a production of Rockflight LLC. Our producer today, you heard him, it's David Karstad. Art direction by Sarah Gensert. I'm Colin True for Justin Hausman, and big thanks to our guest today, Meg Carney. Thank you for listening. And here to take us out, it's the voice of the Rockflight Podcast Network. It's Krista Makes. He's going to perform for you now live right here in studio, the Gear and Beer theme song. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening, and if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book, on YouTube, or subscribe to our weekly newsletter at theoutdoorminimalist.com. For even more updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with the shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.